The room was too loud. That was the first thing Kara done. Noticed when she walked into the council chamber aboard Aurelius Prime. Every ambassador was talking at the same time. Translators were working so fast that the air was thick with layered voices, clicks, hums, and tones that no human throat could ever make. The lights above the long table were dim, but the main display on the far wall was burning bright red. Red meant systems lost. There were a lot of red marks on that map. Kara took her seat at the far end of the table, set her cup of cold coffee down, and looked at the display. She counted the new red marks since the last session. Seven more star systems had gone dark in 4 days. The Vreth Dominion was not slowing down. If anything, it was moving faster. Her aide Pete Hollies leaned close and spoke quietly near her ear. He was 26 years old, thin, with dark eyes that were always slightly too alert, like a man who had not slept well since the war started, which Kara reflected was probably true. Vreth forward units are now inside the Corvid corridor, Pete said. That puts them 40 light years from our border. Kara nodded slowly. She already knew. She had read the report at 4:00 in the morning. She had sat with it for a long time. At the head of the table, Speaker Orith rose from his seat. He was a Selvari, tall and wide, with a deep blue carapace that caught the light, in 6 dark eyes that moved slowly around the room until the noise began to die down. The Selvari were the oldest member species of the Galactic Conclave. Orith had been speaker for 30 years. He had watched this war eat the outer systems piece by piece, and the weight of that watching had made him look very old. The session is called to order, he said. His translator rendered his voice as a low, steady baritone. We face a situation that requires a clear decision. The Vreth advance cannot be met with the forces currently available to the Conclave. We have lost 11 coalition fleets in 14 months. Our remaining naval strength is not sufficient to hold the line at any of the 3 contested corridors. The room stayed quiet. That was worse in a way than the noise. We have therefore prepared a formal petition to the human government, Orith continued. It requests the full deployment of Sol Defense Command across the Corvid, Marin, and Delos corridors, with combined fleet support from 9 Conclave member species. The battle projection suggests that a unified human-led force could stabilize the front within 8 months. He looked directly at Kara when he said, "The next part, Ambassador Dunn. On behalf of the Galactic Conclave, humanity is being asked to go to war." Kara received the formal petition documents through her console. She read the summary, then closed it. She looked at the display map again, at all those red marks, at the names of civilization that were either enslaved or gone. She thought about what she was going to say and decided to say very little. "I will transmit the petition to Earth immediately," she said. "You will have a response." She did not say when. She did not promise what the response would be. Several ambassadors looked frustrated by this. The Havari representative, a small creature with pale silver skin, made a sound that her translator identified as deep unease. The Dorith ambassador, who had lost his home system 9 months ago and was effectively a leader of nothing, looked at Kara with eyes that were simply tired. Kara sent the petition from her console. Before she left the chamber, the response came 6 hours later. She read it in her private quarters with Pete standing nearby. She read it twice. Then she set it down on the desk and was quiet for a moment. "Well," Pete said. "Pack your things," Kara told him. "We have a session to attend in the morning." The next morning, the council chamber was full again. The same noise, the same red display, the same tired faces from 31 species who had been slowly losing for 60 years. Kara walked in, took her seat, and waited for Orith to call the session to order. When the room quieted, Orith turned to her. Kara stood. She was not a tall woman, but she had a way of standing that made people pay attention. She looked around the room once slowly. "Earth has reviewed the petition," she said. "Sol Defense Command has assessed the tactical situation, the Vreth advance, vectors, and the current state of Conclave military capacity." She paused. "Humanity is sending a warship." The silence lasted about 2 seconds. Then the room came apart. Ambassadors spoke over each other in a dozen languages. The translation system started overlapping badly. The Havari representative made that sound of deep unease again, much louder. This time, the Dorith ambassador put his face in his hands. Someone near the back of the room asked, loudly and in 3 languages, if Kara had lost her mind. Orith raised one of his large hands, and the room quieted again, though it took longer than usual. "Ambassador Dunn," he said carefully. "The petition called for the full deployment of Sol Defense Command. Multiple fleets, hundreds of vessels. The projections were built around that assumption." "I understand," Kara said. "Yes," Kara said. Orith looked at her for a long moment. She could not always read Selvari expressions, but she thought that particular look might be pity. "May I ask," he said quietly, "which ship?" Kara opened her console and read the name aloud. It meant nothing to anyone in that room. She had not expected it to. Most of them had never heard of the class of vessel it represented. She gave them a moment to ask questions about specifications and answered the questions in plain, steady language and watched the room get very still as the numbers became clear. The session ended without a formal vote. There was nothing to vote on. Humanity had given its answer. Pete walked beside Kara as they left the chamber and moved through the long corridor that looked out over the gas giant below, its orange and brown bands swirling slowly in the deep. "They think we've abandoned them," Pete said. "Some of them do," Kara agreed. "Have we?" She picked up her cold coffee from the tray a station attendant was carrying, passed and took a sip. "No," she said. On the long-range scanner at the station's monitoring desk, a new drive signature had just appeared, coming in from the direction of human space. The operator stared at it for a moment, confused, and checked his instruments. Twice. The reading was correct. The speed was not a mistake. He flagged it for his supervisor and wrote in the log that something was coming, and it was coming very fast. The Iron Meridian had left the Sol shipyard 7 days ago. She was already past the edge of conclave space and still accelerating. Admiral Vale had been in space for 31 years, and he had never been scared of a ship before. He was scared of this one. He stood at the forward observation port. of his flagship, the Selvari cruiser. Ardent sky, and watch the Iron Meridian come out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Corvid system. She did not arrive the way other ships arrived. Most vessels dropped out of transit with a flash of blue-white light, a shimmer, and then a moment of drift while systems stabilized. The Iron Meridian came out clean and fast, already moving, already oriented, as if she had never stopped paying attention even while crossing light years in a handful of days. She was enormous. Vale had read the numbers in the intelligence brief that Ambassador Dunn had transmitted ahead of the ship's arrival, but numbers on a screen were different from the thing itself, filling your field of view. 14 km from end to end. Dark gray hull plating that seemed to absorb the starlight rather than reflect it. She had no visible gun towers, no protruding weapon pods, nothing that looked like the obvious armaments his own navy used. She was smooth and long, and she moved through space the way a knife moves through water. 300 Vreth warships were tearing apart what was left of his defense flotilla in the inner system. Vale had already sent the warning. He had transmitted on the emergency channel that the human vessel should pull back, that the Vreth force was too large, that there was nothing left here worth dying for. He had been honest about it. He had 17 ships remaining. The Vreth had been hitting them in rotating waves for 6 hours, and the armor on the Ardent sky was down to 40%. On the port side, the response from the Iron Meridian came in the voice of a calm man who sounded like he was sitting at a desk somewhere comfortable. Admiral Vale, this is Captain Leon Adler of the Iron Meridian. Thank you for the warning. Please move your remaining vessels to a distance of no less than 80,000 km from the current engagement zone. We are beginning our targeting sequence. Vale stared at the transmission for a moment. Then he told his helmsman to do exactly what the human had said. His ships pulled back. The Vreth, interpreting this as another conclave retreat, began to regroup for a pursuit formation. They had been doing this for months. It always worked. The smaller conclave fleets would take damage, lose ground, pull back, and the Vreth would advance again. The math of the war was simple and brutal. Nobody had told the Vreth that the math had changed. What happened next was difficult to describe later, and Vale tried many times. The Iron Meridian moved into the engagement zone alone, without support, without hesitation. She did not open fire the way he expected. There was no single beam, no obvious volley. Instead, what came from the human ship was a kind of synchronized pulse across a wide targeting field, a pattern of strikes that hit multiple vessels at the same moment, spread across thousands of kilometers of space, as if the ship was not aiming at individual targets but at the entire formation at once. Vreth ships began to die. Not one at a time. Not in pairs. In groups. The first wave of Vreth vessels, roughly 40 ships in tight formation on the outer edge of the battle cluster, simply ceased to be operational in the span of about 90 seconds. Secondary explosions moved through them in a chain. The Vreth commanders responded the way they always responded. They pushed more ships forward, more firepower, more mass. The Vreth doctrine was built around the idea that if you threw enough at a The problem went away. The Iron Meridian continued her targeting sequence. Vale watched from 80,000 kilometers away, with his bridge crew completely silent. Around him, his tactical officer, a young woman named Sella, who had been with him for 4 years and had seen the fall of 3 systems, was gripping the edge of her console with both hands and not saying anything. The Vreth tried swarm tactics. Groups of smaller fast-attack craft broke off from the main formation and came at the Iron Meridian from multiple angles simultaneously. It was the maneuver that had destroyed 3 Conclave carriers in the Marine corridor. Against the Iron Meridian, it did not work. The human ship's point defense engaged with a speed that made Vale's targeting computers, watching from a distance, failed to log the individual intercepts fast enough. The attack craft came in and they did not reach their target. That was all there was to say about it. 11 minutes after the Iron Meridian entered the engagement zone, Vale's tactical officer said quietly that she was no longer reading any active Vreth vessels in the Corvus system. The silence on the bridge lasted a long time. Lieutenant Gary Foss sat down his targeting controls aboard the Iron Meridian and rolled his neck once. He was a lean man in his late 30s with short brown hair and the kind of face that did not show much. He picked up the cup of water on the console beside him and finished it. "Clean sweep," he said to no one in particular. Commander Dana Oakes looked up from her station. She had been monitoring hull integrity during the engagement. There had been no serious damage. A few energy discharges from the Vreth's long-range guns had skimmed the outer hull plating but had not penetrated. "Captain," she said over the internal channel, "engagement is complete. 0 hull breaches. All systems nominal." Captain Leon Adler sat in the command chair and looked at the forward display. For a moment, he was a broad-shouldered man, not particularly tall, with gray at his temples and lines around his eyes from years of looking at screens in dark rooms. He did not look like someone who had just destroyed 300 warships. "Understood," he said. "Open a channel to Admiral Vale." Vale's transmission came through within seconds. Vale had clearly been waiting. "Captain Adler," the Admiral said. There was a long pause. "What are you?" Adler considered the question. It was a reasonable one. "We are humanity," he said. "We were asked for help." Another pause from Vale's end. "You destroyed 300 vessels in 11 minutes." "Yes," Adler said. "My analysts are telling me that your ship took no significant damage." "That is correct." The silence from Vale's channel stretched out long enough that Adler checked to make sure the connection was still open. Finally, the Salvari Admiral spoke again. His voice was different now, quieter. "The Conclave has been fighting this war for 60 years, he said. "In 60 years, we never won an engagement that size." Adler did not say anything to that. There was nothing to say that would not sound wrong. "We are moving on to the Marine corridor," he said instead. "I would recommend your fleet follow at a safe distance and prepare to assist with any post-engagement search and recovery if needed." "Is that agreeable?" "Yes," Vale said. "That is agreeable." The Iron Meridian turned toward the Marine corridor and began to accelerate. Aboard the ardent sky, Vale watched her go. His tactical officer was still gripping her console, but more loosely now. His communications officer had just started getting calls from the other surviving captains, all asking the same thing, all wanting to know if what they had just seen was real. On the long-range feeds already traveling out across the conclave network, clipped sensor footage of the Corvus engagement was spreading through every channel that still had a signal. In the outer systems, in the relay stations, in the refugee transports, moving away from the war front, people were watching 11 minutes of footage on repeat and not quite believing it. The Iron Meridian was not done. She had barely started. Fun had never been on a human ship before. He had not expected it to feel so ordinary. He was a young Salvari observer, 22 years old by the human count, assigned by the Conclave Science Division to travel aboard the Iron Meridian and document whatever he could. His carapace was light blue, which among the Salvari meant he was young. He had 6 eyes like all his kind, but 2 of them he kept partially closed, most of the time when he was nervous, which was often. He had arrived on the ship with a recording unit, 3 data pads, and a deep and genuine fear of what the next few weeks might look like. He had expected the ship to feel like a weapon. Instead, it felt like a place where people worked. The corridors were wide and well lit. Crew members moved through them with purpose but without urgency, nodding at each other, carrying equipment, talking in low voices. Nobody looked at Fun with hostility. A few looked at him with curiosity. Most looked at him the way people look at a guest who has arrived at a busy house during dinner preparation. Acknowledged, not yet attended to. Commander Dana Oakes was the one who met him at the docking port and walked him to his temporary quarters. She was a tall woman with dark skin and short hair that she kept very neat. She spoke to him clearly and at a reasonable speed, which he appreciated, because the Salvari translator implant sometimes struggled with fast human speech. The captain will speak with you when he has time, she told him. Until then, you are free to move through the common areas of the ship. You will need an escort in the operation sections. Do not touch anything without asking first. I understand, Fun said. Good. If you have questions, ask me or any crew member who is not actively running a combat system. Most of them will help you. She said this last part matter-of-factly, as if it were obvious, and then left him to settle in. Over the following days, Fun began to learn things. He had access to Commander Oakes for 2 hours each morning, during which she would answer his questions about the ship systems. She was careful about what she shared. There were whole sections of his questions she would redirect with a polite but firm, that falls outside what I can discuss with you. He noted these redirections in his log and did not push. He was a guest, and guests who pushed too hard got sent home. What she did share was enough to make him sit quietly in his quarters for a long time afterward, staring at the wall. The ship's primary weapon system worked by targeting multiple points in space simultaneously and delivering gravitational shear across all of them at once. The targeting range was, by conclave standards, physically impossible for a directed energy weapon. Fun had studied weapons physics. He knew what the theoretical limits were supposed to be. He asked Oakes about this carefully, using technical language. She looked at him for a moment. Our range is longer than your models. Predict because our models are different, she said simply. We have been working on this problem for a long time. He wrote in his log that night. She said they have been working on it for a long time. She said it the way someone says the sun rose this morning, as if it is just a thing that happened, not a thing that changes everything. The point defense system was another thing that kept him awake. He had watched the sensor footage of the Corvus engagement 3 times. The Vreth swarm attack, which had destroyed 3 Conclave carriers in the Marin Corridor just 4 months ago, had not worked against the Iron Meridian. He asked Oaks why. How much faster? Fun asked. She smiled slightly. It was a small smile that he was beginning to learn meant she found a question interesting. Faster than anything you have faced in this war, she said. He noted this also. Captain Leon Adler spoke with him on the 4th day. Adler had clearly carved the time out of a busy schedule. He came to the meeting with a cup of something hot and the look of a man who had 3 other things waiting for him. He sat across from Fun in a small room near the forward observation lounge, and he looked at the young Salvari with an expression that was hard to read. Not unkind, just careful. What would you like to know? Adler asked. Why 1 ship? Fun said. Adler looked at him for a moment. Because 1 ship is what was needed. He said. The Conclave asked for many ships. An entire fleet. I know what they asked for. And you sent 1. Yes. Fun thought about how to ask the next question. He was aware that he was very young and that Adler was a man who had been in space for decades and had seen things Fun had not seen. Was it because you did not want to show your full strength? Fun asked. Is that why you sent only 1? Adler put his cup down. He looked at the table for a moment, then back up at Fun. It is because 1 ship was enough for the job, he said. We do not send more than what is needed. That is a rule we follow. What if it had not been enough? Then we would have sent more. Fun sat with that answer for a while. He wrote it down word for word in his log later. What stayed with him was not the words, but the tone. Adler had not said it as a boast. He had said it the way someone states a simple fact about how things work, as if sending more ships was a thing as easy as asking for them. The Vreth, meanwhile, had gone quiet. Across the war front, Vreth advance. Units had stopped moving. Not just slowed. Stopped. The hive mind, which had never paused in 60 years of war, had gone silent across every corridor for 3 days. Conclave analysts were sending frantic messages through the relay network, trying to interpret this. Was it a new tactic? Was it a trap? Were they regrouping for something larger? Lieutenant Gary Foss, when Fun asked him about it during one of the informal corridor conversations Fun had begun to have with crew members, shrugged. They lost a lot of ships very fast, and they have not seen that before, he said. They are thinking. What do you think they will decide? Foss picked up a small tool from the shelf beside him and turned it over his hand. I think they will decide to pull back, he said. But we are going to the Kaith Nebula. Either way, that is where the decision gets made. Fun wrote his report that evening. He had been writing and rewriting the same section for 2 days. The section where he had to explain, in clear language for conclave scientists and military analysts, what the meridian actually was and what it could do. He could describe the weapon's range. He could describe the point defense speed. He could describe the crew who were professional and calm and who ate their meals together in a loud, cheerful mess hall and who seemed to find it completely normal to be doing what they were doing. What he could not quite describe and what he kept trying and failing to put into words was this: nobody on this ship was afraid. Not of the Vreth. Not of the war. Not of what was waiting for them at the Kaith Nebula. They were concerned in the way that people who take their work seriously are always a little concerned. But fear, the deep fear that had lived in the conclave for 60 years, the fear that fun had grown up breathing like air, was simply not present on this ship. He did not know what to do with that. He deleted the section and started it again for the third time. The Kaith Nebula was a bad place to fight a war. That was, of course, exactly why the Vreth had been using it for decades. It was a wide region of ionized gas, thick enough to scatter most sensor signals and dim most long-range targeting systems. Inside it, everything looked like noise. Ships disappeared into it and became suggestions, shapes, possibilities. The conclave had lost 2 full fleets, trying to push into the nebula in the first decade of the war. After that, they had stopped trying. The Vreth used the nebula as their main staging area in the outer systems. Their command mine carriers, the enormous ships that housed the distributed intelligence cores of the Dominion's war leadership, were deep inside it. These were not just warships. They were thinking machines, each one containing thousands of Vreth minds, networked into a single decision-making structure. Destroy enough of them and the Dominion's ability to coordinate its war effort would collapse. Nobody had ever gotten close enough to try. Admiral Vale's 17 ships waited at the edge of the nebula. He had been honest with Captain Adler about why they were there. They were witnesses. If the Iron Meridian went in and did not come back out, the conclave needed someone to report what had happened. If she did come back out, they needed someone to record that too. Adler had said that was fine. The Iron Meridian went in alone. Inside the nebula, the sensors were different. Not blind, but softer. The gas scattered light and energy. Unpredictable ways. Most ships flying in this environment were essentially guessing at where things were. The Iron Meridian was not guessing. Her sensor suite had been built for exactly this kind of environment, and the crew had trained in simulated nebula conditions for 2 years before the ship ever left the solar system. Lieutenant Gary Foss had 3 targeting screens in front of him and a cup of cold coffee to his left that he had not touched in an hour. He was running targeting solutions on moving contacts in a field of interference, updating them every few seconds as the ship's sensors refined their picture of the nebula's interior. It was, by any reasonable measure, the most complex targeting problem he had ever worked with. He found it interesting. The first Vreth contact appeared on his screen 17 minutes after entry. Then more. The command mine fleet was arranged in a loose defensive cluster near the nebula's core, surrounded by a screen of smaller, fast attack vessels. Foss counted the contacts carefully and reported them to Adler. Adler looked at the numbers. He looked at the positions. He told Foss to begin the engagement. Sequence. The Battle of the Caith Nebula lasted 4 hours. For the first 2 hours, it went the way. The corvid engagement had gone. The Iron Meridian moved through the outer screen of fast attack vessels, targeting in wide coordinated pulses. And the Vreth ships died in groups. The interference in the nebula made it harder. Foss had to recalculate targeting solutions more often. Twice he had to pause a firing sequence because the sensor picture shifted and his targets moved. He did not rush. He took the extra seconds, reconfirmed the solutions, and fired when he was certain. Commander Dana Oakes was watching the hull stress readings and the power distribution across every major system. The nebula's ionized environment was putting additional load on the ships. Shielding. Nothing critical. She rerouted power from secondary systems to keep the shielding even. Noted the adjustments in her log and kept watching. Then the Vreth changed their approach. In 60 years of war, the Vreth had never used ramming tactics. It was not part of their doctrine. Their doctrine was about numbers and swarm pressure and overwhelming force. Ramming was a thing you did when you had no other options. They had no other options. The first ramming attack came from a Vreth medium cruiser that had been on the edge of Foss's targeting field. It cut its own drive to full and came in at an angle that was not an attack. Vector, the Iron Meridian's point defense, was prioritizing. It hit the port midsection at a combined speed that made the impact register on every console on the ship. The Iron Meridian shook. Not catastrophically, but she shook. 3 more ramming attacks followed in quick succession. Adler called for evasive maneuvering, while Foss kept the targeting sequence running. Oakes reported hull breaches on 3 sections of the port midsection. Contained breaches. Emergency bulkheads held. She sent damage control teams and kept reporting in the same steady voice she always used. 11 crew members were hurt, 2 of them badly. Foss kept working. After 4 hours fun, watching from a sealed observation room near the ship's center, stopped being able to count the contacts on the display feed he had been given. Not because there were too many, because there were none left. The Iron Meridian came out of the Caith Nebula with damage along her port side, reduced shielding in 3 sections, and 11 injured crew. Behind her, the nebula's interior was quiet in a way it had not been in 60 years. Admiral Vale's fleet, waiting at the edge, watched her emerge. Nobody on Vale's bridge said anything. For a long time, Leon Adler did not go to the bridge. After the engagement ended, he handed command to Dana Oakes, told her she had the ship, and walked down to the medical bay. Kay Marsh was one of the 2 who had been badly hurt. She was a navigation specialist, 24 years old, from a small city in Ohio. She had taken a console impact during the second ramming attack when the supports under her station had partially buckled. Her right arm was broken in 2 places, and she had a concussion and 3 cracked ribs. She was awake when Adler came in. She looked at him from the medical bed with the slightly unfocused look of someone who had been given good pain medication. "Captain," she said. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Mostly okay," she said. "A little loud in my head." He sat down in the chair next to her. Bed. The medical bay was clean and quiet. The other injured crew were in adjacent sections. A medic moved past the doorway outside. Adler sat there for an hour. He did not say much. He asked Marsh a few questions about what she remembered and whether she needed anything. She fell asleep after about 40 minutes, and he stayed until he was sure she was settled. Then he walked back to the bridge. Outside, the conclave network was erupting, the footage from Vale's ships showing the iron meridian emerging from the nebula was already moving through relay stations across the outer systems, in refugee transports and battered stations and the last few fleet ships still holding border positions. People were watching it. Many of them were watching it in silence. 20 hours after the battle, a single transmission reached the iron meridian. It did not come through the conclave relay. It came directly from a Vreth communication channel addressed specifically to the human ship. Adler read it twice. The translation was short. The Vreth wished to discuss terms. They wanted to speak with the people who had built this ship. Adler forwarded the message to Earth without a recommendation. He included the battle report, the casualty list, the damage assessment, and the transmission from the Vreth. Then he went to get coffee and found, for the first time in several weeks, that it was actually hot. 3 weeks after the Keth Nebula, the guns went quiet. It did not happen all at once. It happened system by system, corridor by corridor, the way a fire goes out when you take away what is feeding it. The Vreth Dominion suspended all forward operations across the outer systems and entered preliminary talks with the conclave. The talks were slow and difficult and full of long silences, but they were happening. That alone was something the galaxy had not seen in 60 years. Aurelius Prime filled up again. Ambassadors who had left the station during the worst months of the war came back. Support staff returned. The corridors, which had felt hollow and nervous for years, became loud and full again. Pete Hollis, walking to the council chamber with a stack of briefing documents under his arm, noted that someone had put fresh plants in the corridor near the main elevator. Small ones in gray pots. They had not been there before. He did not mention it to Ambassador Kara Dunn. She would have noticed them herself. The special session of the Galactic Conclave began on a morning that felt, at least from the outside, like something historic. Speaker Orth addressed the council for a long time. He spoke about the cost of 60 years of war. He named the 14 civilizations that had been taken one by one with a pause after each name, and the chamber was very quiet during this part. He spoke about the species who had fought and lost everything and were now beginning the long process of rebuilding. He spoke about the coalition and what it had given and what it had nearly lost. He thanked 47 species by name. He thanked humanity once, near the end, in a brief and careful sentence. His tone when he said it was not cold and was not warm. It was the tone of someone who is being accurate. Kara sat at the end of the long table and listened and kept her face neutral. Beside her, Pete was writing notes on his pad and not looking up. When the session ended, Pete caught up to her in the corridor. "That was a short thank you," he said. Kara walked without slowing down. "It was an honest one," she said. Pete thought about that. He nodded after a moment. "Fair," he said. Across the conclave in the weeks that followed, intelligence agencies were doing something that had never been necessary before, trying to understand humanity, not as a political entity, not as a member species, as a military fact. Reports were being compiled in a dozen languages in a dozen different formats, all of them attempting to answer the same question. What exactly was the Iron Meridian? What did it represent? How did it fit into the larger picture of human military capability? Most of these reports were classified at the highest levels very quickly. What leaked out anyway through the channels that information always leaks through was a version of events that mixed fact with rumor and grew larger in the telling. In dockside bars near the outer relay stations, people talked about the 11 minutes at Corvid the way people talk about things that do not quite fit inside normal understanding. In refugee camps and on transport ships, carrying displaced populations away from the former war zones, the story was told in different ways by different people, but it always ended the same way. One ship. The galaxy asked for help, and they sent one ship, and one ship was enough. The question that no one in the conclave officially asked, but that everyone privately turned over in their minds, was simple: how many ships like that do the humans have? Nobody knew. The humans had not said. Ambassador Cara Dune was asked this question at a diplomatic gathering about 2 weeks after the special session. It was asked by the Havari ambassador, the small silver-skinned one who had made sounds of deep unease all through the worst months of the council sessions. He asked it politely, with the careful phrasing of someone who has rehearsed the question. Cara smiled at him. It was a small smile, not unkind, just steady. She said that she was not in a position to discuss the details of Sol Defense Command's deployment capacity, and that if the Havari government had specific questions about mutual defense arrangements, she would be happy to schedule a formal meeting. The Havari ambassador nodded and moved on to other topics, but he wrote in his own notes that evening that Ambassador Dune's smile had stayed with him for the rest of the party, and that he had not been entirely sure how to read it. Pete Hollis, who had been standing nearby during this exchange, had learned to make exactly the same smile in exactly the same situations. He had not been taught it. He had simply been around Cara long enough that it had become natural. The Iron Meridian was resupplied at a conclave depot near the Maring corridor and began her transit home. The repair crews had done good work on the port side damage. The hole was sealed. The affected sections were back to full operation. Kay Marsh was healing well and had been cleared by the ship's doctor to return to light duties, which she was doing with the slightly impatient energy of someone who hates sitting still. Captain Leon Adler recorded his final operational log entry in the command chair on a quiet watch cycle, with the ship moving through open space at a speed that made the stars seem faintly smeared. The log was 7 sentences long. He noted the engagement dates, the systems cleared, the ship's status, the crew casualty count. He noted that the Vreth surrender overture had been transmitted to Earth and received. He noted that the mission objective had been achieved within the parameters of the original orders. He paused before the last sentence. He read back what he had written. Then he added one more line. It read, Sole Defense Command should be advised that the Conclave now looks at human vessels differently. I'm not certain this changes anything. It may change everything. He saved the log and closed it. Fenn submitted his final report from a Conclave shuttle 2 days after leaving the Iron Meridian. He had been writing and rewriting parts of it for most of the journey. The tactical sections were finished. The weapons analysis was finished. The observations on crew behavior and ship culture were finished. The last section was the one that had given him trouble. He had been trying to write in plain language that a Conclave analyst could read and understand what it had felt like to be on that ship, what it had felt like to watch the Battle of the Keth Nebula from inside, with the hull shaking from ramming, impacts and the damage alarms going, and the crew moving around him doing their jobs without panic, without shouting, without the specific kind of fear that the Selvari had been living inside for 60 years. He had written a lot of versions. He had deleted all of them. In the end, he wrote one paragraph. He did not know if it was the right paragraph, but it was the true one, and he had decided that was more important. It read, the most significant thing I observed aboard the Iron Meridian was not a weapon system or a tactical capability. It was this: the crew was not afraid. Not of the Vreth. Not of the Nebula. Not of what they had been asked to do. They treated the war as a problem to be solved, not a fate to be survived. I have reviewed my notes many times, looking for exceptions to this observation. I have not found any. He sent the report before he could change his mind again. The shuttle moved through the deep quiet of open space. Behind it, a long way back now, the Iron Meridian's drive signature had faded into background noise and was gone. Somewhere ahead, on a station that had just had small plants put in its corridors, Ambassador Cara Dunn was drinking her coffee while it was still warm and reading the preliminary terms that the Vreth had placed on the table. She read them twice. Then she picked up her console and called Pete. "Get me a meeting with Orath," she said. "We have work to do."